The windows of the seventh-floor apartment overlooked a courtyard, and sunlight appeared here for only a couple of hours a day, gliding across the faded wallpaper and threadbare sofa. Elizabeth had grown accustomed to this semi-darkness. It was cozy, like an old blanket, and reliably concealed the emptiness that had settled in her life since moving to the big city. Her job as a proofreader at a small publishing house allowed her to stay indoors for days at a time, and Elizabeth seemed to dissolve into other people's texts, living their lives instead of her own. Mike's appearance in her life was a coincidence that quickly became a pattern. One rainy evening, she was returning from a rare shopping trip and, slipping near the entrance, spilled her grocery bags. Mike, a neighbor from the third floor, whom she had previously only glimpsed in the elevator, helped her pick up the rolled apples and spilled sugar. He smiled openly and easily, tilting his head, looking at her with what Elizabeth thought was genuine interest. "You live above me, right? I think I owe you for that 3 a.m. concert." "Sorry, it was just friends coming over," he said, handing her a soggy bag of flour. Elizabeth was embarrassed, muttered that it was nothing, and was about to disappear into the entryway, but Mike offered to carry her bags to the elevator. Thus began a conversation, and then an acquaintance. For Mike, this was another challenge. At a bar with friends, when the conversation turned to girls. Someone joked about the little grey mouse from upstairs. "Bet you can't get her to talk," his friend taunted him. "It's easy enough to get her to talk," Mike chuckled, watching Elizabeth. Her head hunched, slip past their table in the food court. "I bet a case of whiskey she'll be crazy about me in a month." He didn't see it as cruel. For him, it was a game. A light flirtation. A way to while away boring evenings. He couldn't have imagined how wrong he was. Elizabeth blossomed. It wasn't like a slow awakening, more like a tropical flower, gathering strength for decades. Only to open up to the sun in a single moment. By letting Mike into her life, she felt like she was opening the curtains not only in her apartment but also in her soul. Letting in the light they both so desperately needed. The change was visible to everyone. She stopped hiding behind shapeless sweaters. On their very first shopping trip together, Mike took the featureless beige jumper from her and handed her an emerald dress. "Your eyes are the same color, Ellie. Why are you hiding them?" She blushed, but she bought the dress. A week later, she had deep wine-colored lipsticks, learned to apply eyeliner, and even the bakery clerk remarked, "Girl, you're glowing." Elizabeth truly was glowing. Mike was so perfect it was almost painfully sweet. He didn't just listen to her stories about work, he took it all in. He laughed at her awkward jokes, throwing his head back, crinkling the corners of his eyes. When she mixed up the salt and sugar in her pie, he ate a huge slice with a serious expression and declared, "Salty pastries are the new trend. You're ahead of your time." They laughed until they cried, washing away the salty taste with sweet tea. He brought her coffee in bed, the kind with almond milk and cinnamon that she loved. She remembered it after the first time. Every Sunday morning now smelled of cinnamon and his cologne, the sense of happiness. He stayed the night. And that was the main thing. Before, with other people, she felt awkward, wanting the guest to leave as quickly as possible. With Mike, her apartment ceased to be a refuge, it became their world. They could lie silently in the dark, fingers intertwined, listening to each other's breathing, or talk until 3 in the morning about trivial matters. Whether there is life on Mars, why people don't like rain. One night, he whispered, thinking she was asleep. "How I love it when you're near. As if I've always been here." She wasn't sleeping. She hid this confession in the safest corner of her heart. She began keeping a journal, recording her feelings. "Today he adjusted my scarf outside, automatically, as if I were the most precious thing he had." Or, "He watched me read and said my frown was so beautiful that he would order 1,000 books just to admire it forever." For the first time in her life, Elizabeth felt not like an unnecessary detail on the wallpaper of someone else's party, but the main character. She was needed, alive, beloved. And the feeling was so intoxicating that she didn't notice the oddities, how quickly he put his phone away when she appeared, how a searching expression sometimes flitted across his face. How his friends at the bar looked at her with mocking squints. She chalked it all up to her own apprehension. The main thing was that now, when she woke up in her dimly lit courtyard, she kept the curtains open. And even if the sun rarely peeked through her windows, it had taken up residence inside. And this son's name was Mike. She didn't know that his messages with tender emojis were being sent simultaneously to the group chat with the tag, photo report. That his sudden declarations of love in her ear were part of a plan. And his friends were betting not only on a case of whiskey but also on how long she would cry when he dumped her. Their correspondence was a comedy for them, and for Elizabeth, a diary of happiness. The climax came 2 months later. Elizabeth, feeling an unprecedented surge of courage and trust, decided to surprise him. She arranged for the concierge to let her into Mike's apartment while he was at work and prepare a romantic dinner. She had the key he'd given her, just in case, a gesture she perceived as the ultimate intimacy. Entering his tidy, impersonal apartment, she went straight to the kitchen and placed flowers in a vase. Then she started cooking. While searching for sauce in the top cabinet, she brushed against the laptop sitting on the refrigerator. The screen lit up. Messenger was open. She didn't want to read it, honestly, but her gaze caught her own name in one of the messages. Liska was philosophizing about Dostoevsky again today. I could barely contain my laughter. Place your bets on how long this circus will last. The world rocked. As if in a dream, Elizabeth brought the laptop to the table, sat down on a stool, and began scrolling through the message history in a chat room with the telling name, Fortune Hunters. It was all there. The dates of their first kiss, described as a capture operation. A screenshot of a photo of her in a new blouse, which she sent him with the caption, "Do you like it?" and his comment to his friends. The main thing is that he likes the blouse, not me, otherwise he'll run off and marry me. A discussion of her naivety and gullibility. And most importantly, the final bet. Who's to say Liska will dump him first? I bet she'll run away herself when she finds out the truth. No, Mike's dynamite her for New Year's, so she won't get presents. Tears choked her. But they didn't spill. Something inside her seemed to snap, and an icy horror rushed into the resulting void. She closed the laptop and carefully replaced it. She put the flowers back in the vase in the bag and gathered the groceries she hadn't had time to prepare. She left the apartment as quietly as she had entered. The concierge was surprised to see her with the bags so quickly, but Elizabeth only managed a semblance of a smile. She didn't make a scene. She didn't call or scream. She simply disappeared. She blocked him everywhere, stopped leaving the house, and drew the curtains again. This time, tightly. Other people's lives in books no longer saved her. Her own life now had only one chapter, the one where she was used as a bargaining chip in a men's argument. Mike didn't understand what had happened at first. He tried to reach her, texted her from other numbers, waited outside the entrance. He was furious that he had lost the argument. Not because of his feelings for her, but because of his principle. He needed closure. His triumph. He even wanted to explain himself, to say that it was just a joke, and they weren't discussing anything serious. But she didn't answer. The denouement came 3 weeks later. Elizabeth was sitting in a cafe with her only friend, the one who had persuaded her to come out into the world. Her friend was distracted by her phone. And Elizabeth was looking out the window at the grey city. And then she saw Mike. He stood across the street, looking straight at her. There was no remorse in his gaze. There was curiosity, mingled with mild irritation. He started to cross the street, but at that moment 2 guys approached him, the same ones from the bar, judging by their insolent grins. They clapped Mike on the shoulder, said something, and all 3 burst out laughing, glancing sideways at the cafe. Elizabeth felt physically ill. She realized that even now, after everything, she was just a character in a joke to them. The bet had long since ended. The bets lost and won, but only her life had been destroyed. Her ability to trust, her faith in people, her barely blossoming happiness, all of it sacrificed to male pride and boredom. Mike and his friends moved on, looking for new victims for new bets, and she remained here, in this grey city. In her dimly lit apartment, with fragments of trust that would never be mended. She turned away from the window, pulled her hood up, and, saying goodbye to her surprised friend, walked out the back door. She wasn't running. She was simply closing the door on a life where she'd been nothing more than a pawn in someone else's game. But the scar from that game would remain with her forever, a reminder of how easily the fragile world of someone she'd dared to trust could be shattered.